Okay, good morning. Nice to see everyone. This morning, we really have a fascinating discussion. I know I say that every week, but this morning's topic in particular is something that has captured the hearts and imaginations of the Jewish people for centuries. Our topic this morning is the 10 lost tribes. Are they really lost? Are they lost forever? Are they returning? And, we live during, confusing times, challenging times, but we also live during exciting times. We live during miraculous times, and we've witnessed in our very own days, we've witnessed in our times, in recent decades, a return of the Jewish people from the four corners of the earth to their land here, the land of Israel. And it's nothing short of miraculous, witnessing the Jews of Ethiopia returning with Operation First Brothers, Mivtza Achim, and then, of course, the major airlifts, Operation Moses and Joshua and Solomon. And then even in recent decades and years, they keep trickling in. Hopefully the last of them will be returning very shortly. Just the other week, there was a crop that made Aliyah. And we've seen Jews from the former Soviet Union and really all over the world make their way back to the land of Israel, return home, and it's nothing short of miraculous. And this fascination with the 10 lost tribes is also not anything new. For centuries, really from the time that they were exiled, there's been discussion and debate and speculation over where they are and their fate. Will they return? And you have mentions, discussions already in the Nevi'im and the prophets about them ultimately returning. And then in Chazal, we'll see the Mishnah already discusses the 10 lost tribes, as does the Midrashic literature and the Talmudic literature. So our rabbinic literature is filled with references and discussions here and there about the fate of the 10 lost tribes. Did they already return, or part of them return with Yirmiyahu before the Babylonian exile? Will they return in the future, or are they lost to the dustbin of history? Will they return? Should they do tshuva? Will they return as righteous converts? And then over the centuries, you have different individuals claiming to have found the 10 lost tribes during the Gaonic period in the 9th century, Eldad Hadani, and then later different Jewish travelers during the medieval period claiming to have had interaction with some of the 10 lost tribes. With the messianic movements of Shabtai Tzvi and others, there's of course a renewed interest in finding the 10 lost tribes. The Vilna Gaon, for instance, who sent his Talmidim, his students, to come on Aliyah in the early, he sent them in the 18th century, but they come on Aliyah in the early 19th century and come in order to bring about redemption, b'derech hateva, through the natural means. They too are searching for the 10 lost tribes, perhaps to be able to reinstate real smicha, real rabbinic ordination, if you will, ish mipi ish ad beit dino shel Moshe, in the lashon of the Rambam. They wanted to restore or reinstate real smicha, to be able to restore the Sanhedrin and bring about the redemption. And then again, over the last century plus, discoveries of different groups, different tribes claiming a connection pre-state, following the establishment of the state of Israel, whether it's the Jews of Ethiopia or the Jews of some claim, for instance, the Pashtuns in Afghanistan are from the 10 lost tribes, whether it's the Igbo in Nigeria and other places in Africa, or the B'nai Menashe in recent years who've come on Aliyah from Myanmar, Burma, or the Jews of Cochin, or other places in India where they too claim to be descendants of the 10 lost tribes. Again, we are living during exciting times. And so this morning what I'd like to do together is to explore some of these passages in Tanakh which describe the exile of the 10 lost tribes, how they got lost, okay, and where they may be by looking at passages in the Tanakh and in Chazal, in rabbinic literature, and then answer the question, are they lost forever? Are they lost to the dustbin of history, or will they return and rejoin the Jewish people? Okay, so a little background. Here in source number 1, I put a few psukim from Melachim Aleph Perek Yud Aleph, where the Navi Achia Hashiloni comes to Melech Shlomo and informs him that due to his sins, Hashem is going to take away his kingdom from him. Okay? Now, the Perek begins there. I didn't give you the entire Perek. The Perek begins there that basically Shlomo did not follow the advice of the Torah, the warning of the Torah. He had too many wives. Those wives were involved in idolatry. They led him astray. And due to these sins, his kingdom is going to be split. Okay, so take a look here at Pasuk Yud Aleph. This is Melachim Aleph Perek Yud Aleph, Pasuk Yud Aleph, where he's told the following: Vayomer Hashem li Shlomo Yan asher hayta zot imach velo shamarta briti v'chukotai asher tziviti alecha karoa ekra et hamamlacha me'alecha unetatiha le'avdecha. Since Hashem says to him, since you did not keep my mitzvot, my commandments, my decrees that I've commanded you, I'm going to tear your kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. Okay? Ach biyamecha lo e'eshena leman David avicha miyad bincha ekra'ena rak et kol hamamlacha lo ekra shevet echad eten livnecha leman David avdi uleman Yerushalayim asher bacharti. So the psukim continue that, however, I'm not going to tear it away in your own days, during your own lifetime, because of David HaMelech, your father. In other words, bischut David, I'm not going to punish you in your lifetime, but following your death, the kingdom is going to be taken away from you, and of course it's going to split into two, which we'll talk about in a moment. Okay? And again, I'm not going to do it in your days because of David HaMelech. However, I'm going to tear away the kingdom, and only one tribe will survive. Okay, and that's going to be because of the sake of David HaMelech. Now, that tribe is really two tribes. It's Yehuda and Binyamin, but it's Yehuda that's significant because Malchut Beit David comes from Yehuda. Okay, that's what the Navi is referring to here. And then, so this takes place, in around the 10th century BCE, with the death of Shlomo. And what happens is then the kingdom is ultimately split into two following his death. You have his son Rechavam, who's coronated as king, but shortly thereafter, Yeravam ben Nevat proclaims himself as king, right? In fact, his very name suggests that he caused a rift, a split, a riv in the Am, Yeravam. He caused a riv, a fight or a split in the nation. And of course, he was an idolater, and there's all sorts of statements in the Talmud how he's such a bad individual and the worst king, and he can't do tshuva and he'll never be accepted. All sorts of statements like that. But he, of course, as you know, prevented people from coming on Aliyah Regel. He put roadblocks. In fact, one of the things that we celebrate on Tu B'Av, one of the reasons why it's such a happy day for the Jewish people, as the Mishnah says, the Gemara explains, one of the reasons is that those roadblocks that he had placed there were finally removed. And in any case, you have him making idolatrous temples in Beit El and in Dan, replacing the Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. I said he prevented those people who wanted to go, and you can imagine why he wanted to prevent them from going on Aliyah Regel to Yerushalayim, right? You go to Yerushalayim, and you want to serve Hashem, you want to do tshuva. He wanted to keep them loyal to him. And he created this idolatrous nation. He, in fact, even created a new holiday on the Jewish calendar, okay? In the month of Cheshvan, when there are no other Jewish holidays, and it was a pagan holiday. So, in any case, this is how the kingdom splits, and of course you have Malchut Yehuda in the south, that's Yehuda and Binyamin, and then Malchut Yisrael in the north, the northern kingdom, and those are the 10 tribes. Now, we talk about the 10 lost tribes, but what's interesting is, initially, at least according to many, before the 10 lost tribes were exiled by Sancherev, Melech Ashur, you first had the tribes of Reuven, Gad, and half the tribe of Menashe exiled. Now, if you recall, as we'll be reading shortly in Sefer Bamidbar, the tribes of Reuven, Gad request land on the other side of the Yarden, and there's this whole discussion with Moshe, and Moshe initially suspects them of recommitting the sin of the spies. You're rejecting the land of Israel. And they say, no, we have a lot of cattle, mikneh rav, we got a lot of, this land is good for us, is good for grazing. So they work out a deal with Moshe, and then all of a sudden Moshe sticks in half the tribe of Menashe, which is interesting because Menashe never made that request. So some explain, like the Nitziv and others, that, well, maybe Moshe did that intentionally in order to keep them connected with their brethren on the other side of the Yarden. Because if you have half a tribe on one side and half the tribe on the other, it will ensure that the tribes on this side of the Yarden maintain their connection, maintain maybe their Jewish identity, even, as some explain. Right? So fine. But perhaps, as some read into it, because they rejected the land of Israel and wanted land on the other side of the Jordan, it's a whole discussion, eventually, in a certain sense, becomes the land of Israel, but because they requested that, they were the first to, let's say, be exiled. Okay? And if you take a look here in source number 2, this is from Melachim Bet, Perek Tet Vav. So it's described here in Melachim Bet. It's not explicit in Melachim Bet, Perek Tet Vav, but it talks about there how in the 39th year of Azariah, Melech Yehuda, he was the king over the kingdom of Yehuda, as we mentioned, and Menachem Hagadi, Menachem of Gad, was the king over Malchut Yisrael, and he reigned for 10 years, and he continued to do what was evil in the eyes of Hashem, just like Yeravam ben Nevat. And then all of a sudden, the Navi describes this king of Ashur by the name of Pul, or Fool, and it describes how Menachem, the king of Israel, he gave this Pul, or fool, I call him a fool. He was a fool. This Pul, Melech Ashur, he gave him almost a bribe, let's call it, of 1,000 talents of silver, right? Why did you think he would give him that money? Right? To buy him off, right? And he would give him all this money, and he placed heavy taxes on the Jewish people in order to provide him with money. And then the passage ends that this Melech Ashur, this fool Melech Ashur, he retreated, right? He retreated and seemingly did not remain in the land, did not attack the Jewish people. That's maybe how you could interpret these psukim, right? In other words, he bought him off, or maybe he held him off for the while. And then the Navi continues and says, and the rest of the story of this king, it's found in the book of Chronicles, Divrei Hayamim. So what do you have to do? So you have to look in Divrei Hayamim and see how the story is fleshed out over there. And if you take a look at source number 3, this is from the first book of Chronicles, Divrei Hayamim Aleph, Perek He.
He fooled him?
Yes, maybe. So if you take a look at Divrei Yamim Aleph, Perek He, over there, right? So Divrei Hayamim, the book of Chronicles, it often summarizes or retells some of the narratives that we already have elsewhere in the Tanakh. Sometimes it mentions things that we do not have. Sometimes it adds new colors, so to speak, new ideas, new vantage points, new details of the story, and in this case, a very important detail. And here, if you look at source number 3, here it describes perhaps what is actually going on in source number 2 between the lines. Okay, so this is Divrei Yamim Aleph Perek Hey, Pasuk Chaf Hey, Chavav. And what's being described there? Okay, it says there, describes how Ruvain, Gad, Chatzi, Shevet Menashe were not following the mitzvot Hashem, how they rebelled against Hashem. Okay, they betrayed Hashem, the God of their forefathers. And then what? Pasuk Chavav. Here, look where I am. Vayar Elokei Yisrael et Ruach Pul Melech Ashur vet Ruach Tiglat Fil Neser Melech Ashur. Hashem, he stirred up the spirit of this king that we mentioned, Pul, and another Assyrian king, Tiglat, okay, or Tiglat Fil Neser, Vayaglem la Ruveni v'legadi v'lachatzi shevet Menashe vayeviem l'chalat v'chavor v'hara unahar gozan ad hayom hazeh. Very, very important pasuk for our discussion this morning. These kings exiled the tribes of Reuven, Gad, and the half-tribe of Menashe, who were there, who had settled in the Transjordan, and they brought them to Chalat, Chavor, Hara, Nahar Gozan, and they're there ad hayom hazeh. Okay, what are these places? Where are these places? Okay, and
question: what's the difference in what Pul and Melech Ashur did, and until God goes?
no, the Navi is just saying that both of them together.
Also, same position. How can you have two in the same position?
Okay, so it could be that this was a gradual process. It didn't happen all at once. It took place during 2 administrations. That's one way to read the pasuk. It took place during 2 administrations. Or it could be that the Assyrian kingdom had multiple kings. But no, I think you could read it that this was gradual. You can't exile so many people all at once. It takes time. Okay? So in any case, it could be that for the time being, Menachem Hagadi, who at that time was the Melech Yisrael, bought off Pul, as is described in Sefer Melachim Bet, but finally maybe the money ran out, or the policy changed, and the 2.5 tribes who had settled in the Transjordan were exiled. And they were exiled to these places, and we'll come back to these places shortly, because we'll see that these places are the same places that the other tribes were exiled to as well. And if you take a look at source number 4, going back to Sefer Melachim Bet, Perek Yud Zayin, okay, here it describes how, again, the Jewish people continue to do wicked in the eyes of Hashem. And this is, now we're talking about, roughly the 8th century BCE. Okay, so this is, about 2 centuries before Churban Bayit Rishon, before Galut Bavel, before the Babylonian exile. And you have the 10 lost tribes conquered by Sancherev Melech Ashur. That's what's being described here in Melachim Bet Perek Yud Zayin. Okay? All right, so this is during the reign of Achaz, right? And he was Melech Yehudah, and Hoshea ben Elah was the Melech Yisrael, and the Jewish people, or it says that at least the Malchut Yisrael continued to do wicked in the eyes of Hashem, and so Shalmaneser, Melech Ashur, he waged war against Hoshea, against the northern kingdom, and they again tried to buy them off. They became their servants. They paid them taxes, but eventually it didn't work anymore. Eventually, they were conquered, and then of course the northern kingdom was exiled. And if you take a look here at Pasuk Vav, Bishnat HaTshi'it LeHoshea, in the 9th year of the reign of Hosea, okay, what happened? Lachad melech Ashur et Shomron, the king of Assyria, captures Shomron, captures Samaria. That was the seat of Malchut Yisrael, of the northern kingdom. Vayagel et Yisrael Ashura. And the Jewish people were the 10 lost tribes, rather. At this point, maybe the seven remaining tribes were gathered or exiled towards Ashur. Vayashev otam b'chalat uv'chavor nahar Gozan v'arei Madai. Like we had previously. This pasuk adds, however, the cities of the Median Empire. Okay? But they were exiled to these places, Chala, Chavor, near the Gozan River, Nahar Gozan, like we had previously. Okay? And the cities of Media. Where are these cities? We don't know. We know that the Media was part of the Persian Median Empire, but that extended far and wide. Right? And if you turn the page, another passage here in Melachim Bet, Perek Yudchet, Vayagel Melech Ashur et Yisrael Ashura, Vayanchem bechalat uvechavor nahar Gozan v'arei Madai. A parallel passage here in Perek Yudchet, again, how they were exiled by the king of Ashur to these cities or to these lands. We don't really even know. Okay. But take a look here at source number 6. This is a passage from the Gemara in Yevamot, on Daf Tet Zayin to Yud Zayin. At the very bottom of Tet Zayin it begins. There's a parallel passage in the Gemara in Kiddushin as well. Now, the Gemara tries to identify these places. So this is a major source for those who are searching for the 10 tribes. This is a very important source to try to figure out where they were exiled, because Chazal had a tradition as to where these places are, where these places were. Okay? Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana. Now, it's important to just point out the context here. We're discussing, of course, Yevamot discusses levirate marriage, but also discusses Yuchasin, right? And there's a question. Let's say you should find someone from the lost tribes, one of the 10 lost tribes, and he would marry into the Jewish people. Can he marry into the Jewish people? Or is his very status as a Jew in question? He's been lost for centuries, right? When Chazal are dealing with this question, the 10 lost tribes have been lost for centuries and centuries. So is that considered a Jewish marriage if someone from one of those tribes marries into the Jewish people? So that's the context. So Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana says, he brings this pasuk that we saw, Vayanchem bechalat uvechavor nahar Gozan v'arei Madai, pasuk from Melachim Aleph, Perek Yudchet, and he identifies chalat ze chilazon. Chalat is chilazon. Now, chilazon, we know, is the snail or the sea creature that the tchelet has to be made from. Right? But what is this chilazon? So some say it's chalazon or haliwan, right? Maybe it's somewhere near Baghdad, and not clear. Okay? Then he says, chavor, Zol Hadayeb. Sounds almost like an Arab place. So some identify this as some ancient kingdom, Adiabene, somewhere, in what is today northern Iraq. Okay, not clear. Nahar Gozan. Remember, they were exiled by the river of Gozan. Soon we'll be talking about a different river, right? And so that's identified as Ginzak, which is interesting. The Gemara relates how Rabbi Akiva visited Ginzak at one point. Some say that Ginzak is near northeastern Syria by the Khabar River, the Khaybar River, and that, there are also all sorts of speculation as to, the Pashtuns or these other tribes Maybe that proves their connection to the 10 lost tribes. And then, remember, the Pasuk said that they were also exiled to the cities of the Median Empire, of Are Madai, right? Are Madai zo Hamadan, v'chavruteha. This is Hamadan and its neighboring cities, its neighboring towns, the Hamadan metropolitan area, right? Hamadan in the periphery there, its suburbs. So we know where Hamadan is today. Hamadan, if you ask anyone from Persia, they will tell you, Hamadan, up until the major migration, if you could even call it, maybe an escape of Persian Jewry to Israel and to, Los Angeles and New York, Great Neck. But that was a major Jewish city, and historically that is the city that was believed to be Shushan Habira. And in fact, in Hamadan, you have the graves of Mordechai and Esther. Okay? So we have this city until today. Okay? So then the Gemara continues and, identifies what those neighboring towns are. Kerech, Mushche, Chidki, Dumkaya, if I'm pronouncing it right, please forgive me. I don't know if any of these cities are identified or any of these towns are identified as Persian cities today, but what's significant is the Gemara then continues and says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan v'kulan lifsol. All of them are pasul, meaning all of the Jews of the 10 lost tribes are invalid. Why are they invalid? The assumption is that they've been lost and they've intermarried, and they cannot join the Jewish people. Again, that's the context that the Gemara is discussing this and identifying all of these places. So a whole discussion ensues. Well, okay, but what if that's true? And there's mamzerut and whatever. But we know that if a Jewish man marries a non-Jewish woman, a Gentile woman, so the children are not Jewish. That we know. But if a non-Jewish man marries a Jewish woman, the children are Jewish. So the Gemara asks the question, well, what if we're talking about Jewish women, right? A Jewish woman married a man in Persia, right? She was exiled and she married a Jewish man. And then that child married a Jewish woman, or that child herself was a Jewish woman, right? So it's very possible that there are still Jews. So then the Gemara continues with, a terrible answer. Well, there's a tradition they had that the women either were barren or maybe the women, all these Jewish women were forcibly, I don't know what the right word is, made barren. They were, you might say sirus and ikur. They were made barren. In any case, so the assumption is that they can't marry into the Jewish people, meaning maybe they are no longer Jewish. Okay, there's a real question, and we'll come back to this idea a little later on this morning, because maybe that means they require conversion. Okay, but in any case, you have other places in the rabbinic literature where they try and identify these places. There are other sources in the midrashic literature. If you'd ask someone, where the 10 lost tribes are, they'll tell you they are beyond the river Sambation, right? That's the famous answer. Where is the river Sambation? We don't know. Okay. Although there are claims even that some made as to where the river Sambation is, but we really don't know. And even, as I mentioned, there are those who try to identify these places, Chalad, Chavor, Nahar Gozan, Are Madai. Very, very difficult. It's really just speculation. Very difficult to say with any real certainty. Especially, we know that the Mishnah Yadayim says that Sancherev came along and he just completely made a cholent of the entire world, right? He scattered people from all different nations and scattered them around so they wouldn't rebel against him. And we really don't know. But if you take a look here at source number 7, this is just one of the many sources that mentions the river Sambation, where I've underlined, Aseret HaShvatim galu lifnim min nahar Sambation. They were exiled before the river Sambation, right? Whatever that means. Shevet Yehuda Binyamin mefuzarin bechol ha'aratzot. According to this source, then ultimately later, the tribes of Yehuda and Binyamin were scattered to all lands. By the way, this is actually based on a pasuk and a prophecy. So we'll see in a few moments that there is a machloket tanaim, a dispute among the sages of the Mishnah as to the fate of the 10 lost tribes. Will they come back or not? And it's based on Chazal's reading of different psukim and different traditions, but the idea is that the 10 tribes, they were scattered to, let's say, very specific places, right? And maybe that means that they are lost, as opposed to the prophecies which describe how Jews will come back from all 4 corners of the earth. Maybe that, again, according to some, their reading of Tanakh and these traditions, etc., the promise of the redemption and the ingathering of the exiles from all different lands, that's a reference to Yehuda and Binyamin, the southern kingdom, Malchut Yehuda, who were scattered to all different lands. So ultimately the prophecies in Yeshayahu and elsewhere talking about the ingathering of the exiles from all the lands, that's a reference to Yehuda and Binyamin. Whereas the 10 lost tribes who were exiled to specific lands, they've been lost to history. Okay, so that is, as we'll see in a few moments, a machloket. But I just wanted to draw your attention here for a moment. In source number 7, there are a lot of passages in the Midrash and the Talmud Yerushalmi and elsewhere that mentions the river Sambation, Talmud Bavli as well. So here, take a look at source number 8. Turn the page, and where I've underlined towards the bottom of source number 8, Rabbi Brachia, Rabbi Chelba b'shem Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman, l'shalosh galuyot galu Yisrael. There were 3 exiles that the Jewish people, or 3 exiles in which the Jewish people were exiled. Echad lifnim minahar Sanbation. Okay, as we said before, there's this tradition that they were exiled before, not beyond the river Sambation, but before the river Sambation. Okay? Now here, interestingly, it's spelled with a nun, Sanbation. We saw before, it's called in the Midrash, in source number 7, Sambation with a mem. Sometimes it appears without a mem or a nun, and it's just Sabation. So there are different spellings, different traditions, but that's less important for now. Ve'echad lidifnei shel Antiochiai, ve'echad she'erad aleihem ha'anan v'kiseotam. Different interpretations, different traditions as to exactly where they are. Are we talking about the exile first of Ruvain, Gad, and the half-tribe of Menashe, followed by the rest of the northern kingdom later, as we explained, and then maybe the exile of Yehuda and Binyamin? Not so clear from the Midrash. Also not so clear, again, where these places are. Where is the river Sambation? As we saw, the Gemara Yevamot tries to identify the places that the Navi tells us the 10 lost tribes were exiled to. Chalat, Chavor, Nahar Gozan, Are Madai. But it's not so clear really where these places are. And what is this river Sambation? Is that the same as the river Gozan, which is mentioned in Sefer Malachim and Sefer Divrei Hayamim? Not clear. But there's a lot of speculation. Even you have, for instance, Josephus and Pliny the Elder talking about the river Sambation. Okay, here I put another midrashic source in source number 9. This is from the Psikta Rabbati. Achat galta l'Sambation, v'achat galta lifnim misambation, v'achat galta lidifnei shel Ravlita v'nivla Asham. Also a tradition that there were 3 exiles. One the first or maybe the second. It's not clear from this passage as well, whether we're talking about the first exile of Reuven, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. But one was exiled beyond the river Sambatyon, one was exiled to before the river Sambatyon, and one was exiled to this place, Rivlita, and was swallowed up there. Right? Not clear. Not clear. Okay, yes. But take a look at sources 10 and 11. This is a Gemara in Sanhedrin, and now the Gemara in Sanhedrin is chock full of fascinating conversations between our sages and important historical figures of the time about all sorts of philosophical and spiritual and religious, even political issues. And there's a conversation there that takes place between Turnus Rufus and Rabbi Akiva. Okay? And what does the Gemara there say? They're engaged in this conversation, and Turnus Rufus is asking him all sorts of questions. Among them, he turns to Shabbat, and one of the questions he asks about Shabbat is, well, how do you know today is Shabbat, right? Or how do you know, not today, but how do you know, 3 days ago is Shabbat? How do you know that what we call Saturday is your Shabbat, right? Maybe it got mixed up, maybe it got lost. So Rabbi Akiva gives him some sort of empirical evidence, some sort of proof. Right? How do you know? Is there some sort of physical evidence that today is Shabbat? How can you prove it? Right? Well, it's the seventh day. It says on my calendar Shabbat, right? I go to myzmanim.com, or I take a look in the Eretz Yisrael Luach. No. How do you know today is Shabbat? Prove it. So Rabbi Akiva wants to give Turnus Rufus some sort of proof, and he says, you know how I know? Look where I've underlined, source number 10, Nahar Sabatyon Yochiach. Now here it's spelled without a mem or a nun, it's just called Sabatyon. And he says the river Sabatyon will prove it. How will it prove it? Okay, take a look at Rashi. And this is a famous tradition that a lot of people are familiar with. Nahar echad shel avanim uvechol yemot ha-Shabbat shotef v'holech ubiyom ha-Shabbat shoket v'nach. It's a river of rocks, boulders. Why a river of rocks and boulders? To make it impossible to cross. Again, there's this tradition that the lost tribes were exiled, or maybe 7 of them. Again, it depends how you want to read all these midrashim, all these Talmudic sources and rabbinic sources and put them together. But they're exiled beyond the river Sambatyon, so to make it impossible for them to pass, it's this river that's spitting out rocks, okay? And the entire week, it's flowing, explains Rashi. However, the one day a week, it's quiet. Ubiyom ha-Shabbat shoket v'noach, or v'nach, it rests. One day a week, this river rests. And in theory could be crossed, but what's the problem? Tchum Shabbat, right? You can't go past it. You can't travel a certain distance on Shabbat, so they can't leave the exile. So during the week it's impossible. It's this impasse. It's this hurdle because of all the rocks flowing. The one day a week it's quiet. And so Rabbi Akiva uses this as a proof to Turnus Rufus, say, hey, look, just take a look at the river, right? You know how I know that today is Shabbat? Because the river is quiet. Okay, you can take it for what it's worth and interpret it how you wish. But what's interesting is there were those great Gaonim, Rishonim, Poskim, who actually really understood this to be a real phenomenon, not some just sort of midrashic statement. But I mentioned in our introduction Eldad Hadani, this fascinating figure who appears out of nowhere in the 9th century, and he's traveling all over the world and weaving all sorts of tales, how he has found the lost tribes in Ethiopia and different places, and he's even teaching halachot that he learned from these lost tribes, halachot that are recorded by later Gaonim and Rishonim. And so the Gaonim at that time are consulted. Rav Tzemach Gaon of Karawan is consulted if we can take this Eldad Hadani at his word. I mean, is this true, or is he just spinning yarns, weaving tales? Are there indeed lost tribes in Africa, right? Or again, they lost to the dustbin of history forever. And he actually, Rav Tzemach Gaon, it becomes a very important source for later poskim, takes Eldad Hadani at his word. As I said, his words, his halachot, are quoted by Rishonim. Some object, but many Rishonim quote, major Rishonim, including Rashi, quotes Eldad Hadani, right? Or at least the halachot that he teaches and things. Again, it requires a lot of discussion, but it's beyond beyond the scope of our discussion this morning. But one of the things that Rav Tzemach mentions is, yes, we have this tradition that they are beyond the river Sambatyon, this river that is flowing with rocks, and Rav Tzemach Gaon believes this to be actually a factual thing, a real phenomenon. Okay, fine. So those are some of the statements in the rabbinic literature that try to identify where the lost tribes could be located. But then there's a major question, and we'll see it's a machloket Tanaim, whether they will even return to the Jewish people. How do we know they'll even return? It's possible, as I mentioned before, that the promises of redemption and the promises of the ingathering of the exiles from the four corners of the earth are only in reference to Malchut Yehuda, to the tribes of Yehuda and Binyamin, the southern kingdom. That's what we're talking about there. And the other tribes are lost and will never return. So this is the subject of a major dispute. It's already a dispute in the Mishnah here in source number 12. I'll just mention, we don't really have time to go into it, but there is an interesting discussion of whether or not maybe they came back before the Babylonian exile, that maybe Yirmiyahu brought them back. And it's actually based on, it's an interesting discussion with regards to Yovel and Shemitah. It has all sorts of ramifications. According to the Rambam, it has ramifications for Trumot and Masrot as well in terms of their status nowadays, because Yovel requires Kol Yoshveha Aleha. The Pasuk there, we read it not too long ago in Parshat Bahar, in discussing Yovel, says, Ukratim dror ba'aretz l'chol yoshveha. You proclaim liberty to all the land, to all its inhabitants. It's inscribed on the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, that famous verse. And Chazal understand that to mean that Yovel requires to really have this Jubilee year. Again, I'm not going to go into it now for the sake of time, but it requires all the Jewish people, because they have to proclaim freedom and liberty to all the lands, right? To all its inhabitants. L'kol yoshveh, to all its inhabitants. Maybe you need its inhabitants. Do you need all? Maybe a rove is sufficient, right? According to the discussion, Rambam, Tosfot, maybe you need the tribes to be residing on their ancestral tribal plots, so that each tribe, Dan would have to be sitting, in Dan, I guess what is that, near Tel Aviv over there, right? The Merkaz, right? And Binyamin would have to be in Yehuda. So how would you be able to accomplish that? So based on that premise that we require liberty to be proclaimed throughout the land to all of its inhabitants, we require Kol Yoshveh Aleh. And as I said, it's a major machloket. Rishonim, how we interpret that. Right? Does it mean all? Does it mean most? Does it mean that they have to reside on their tribal lands? And then the Rambam wants to say, with regards to Trumot and Masrot, we require Biat Kulchem, because the Torah, we'll be reading it soon at the end of Parshat Shlach, with the mitzvah of Chala, which is one of the Matnot Kunah. It's a Trumah. The Rambam extends that to all Trumot and Masrot. It says when you enter the land. So that too requires Biat Kulchem. So there are a lot of nafkaminot lahalacha, very important discussion, but beyond our scope. But based on this discussion, the Gemara in Megillah, here in source 13, and in Arachin, in source 15, the Gemara questions whether maybe the tribes had already returned to the land of Israel before the Babylonian exile. Yirmiyahu brought them back, or at least Rashi says, brought most of them back. Lo shechziran kulan ela mikzatam hichzir. But that again is the subject of a Talmudic dispute, whether or not Yirmiyahu brought back the tribes or brought back most of them or part of them before the Babylonian exile. But take a look here at source number 12. This is the Mishnah in Masechet Sanhedrin on Daf Kuf Yud. The Mishnah says, Aseret HaShvatim einan atidin lachzor. Okay? the Tanakama of the Mishnah says that the 10 tribes will not return to the land of Israel. They're lost. Shneimar, as the pasuk in Dvarim Chavtet says, "Vayashlichem el eretz acheret kayom hazeh." Hashem says they will be cast, or Hashem will cast them to another land, as it is this day. Okay, so the pasuk uses the word this day, kayom hazeh. It invokes the word yom. So we'll see how Rabbi Akiva interprets the word yom. Okay? Ma hayom holech ve'eno chozer, af hem holchim ve'enan chozrim. Just as the day, right, goes and doesn't come back, days don't return, you can't get your time back, right? So too, the tribes are lost and they will not return. Right? Rabbi Akiva expounds on that word kayom hazeh, and says just like a day passes and never to return, so too the 10 tribes have gone and will never return. That's divrei Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Eliezer says kayom hazeh. He also darshans the word kayom. What does it mean? As it is this day. Mayom ma'afil umeir afaseret hashvatim shafilu lahen kach atida lahayir lahem. He interprets the word day in a very different way. Just as a day can get dark, right? Ofel, afela, mi'urpal. A day can get cloudy and hazy, but then what? The next day, or maybe even the same day, the sky brightens, the sun comes out. So too will be the 10 tribes. In the future, it will be bright for them. Right now, afela lahem. Right now it's dark. But just as the day goes on and the sun comes out and the sun shines, kach atidala hayir lahem. So too in the future it will be brightened for them. It will be bright, it will be illumined for them. Okay, very, very powerful passage. Now the Gemara continues this discussion. So take a look here. The Gemara cites a braita there. Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught. Now here the Gemara is talking about whether they have a chelik in olam haba. So what does that mean? Does that mean that they're going to return for messianic times, or is it related to something else? Maybe because they've sinned, that they've lost their share in the world to come. But many understand it to mean that no, it's referring to this discussion, our question, our debate. Will they return and rejoin the Jewish people in the future? And it brings psukim, etc. Okay, I'm just going to skip for the sake of time, as we're almost out of time. But as we saw, it's a machloket already. So one opinion is that they've been cast to another land, and based on psukim, they are they're cast into another land, which excludes them from the world to come. That's in accord with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, which we saw in the Mishnah, who holds that they're not going to return. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda from the Kfar Akko, the village of Akko, says in the name of Rabbi Shimon that no, they will return so long as they do tshuva. Okay, that's the lashon here. Im ma'asehem kayom hazeh einan chozrin. If they continue to sin, if their actions are, again, kayom hazeh, the Torah said that they're going to be exiled as is this day. So here's another interpretation, another kvetch on that pasuk, or on these words, kayom hazeh. If their actions are kayom hazeh, if they're continuing to sin as they do today, einan chozrin, then they will not return, the im lav. But if they change their ways, if their actions are not like they are today, if they do tshuva, chozrim. So according to Rabbi Shimon, they'll come back. Okay? And then you have the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, who holds that indeed they will come back, and this is based on a pasuk, a very famous pasuk, Bayom hahu yitaka b'shofar gadol. On that day it shall come to pass a great shofar will be sounded, and the pasuk continues that all who were lost in Ashur, all who were dispersed in Yeshaya, in Egypt, there's a pasuk in Yeshayahu, Perek Chaf Zayin. Okay, they're all going to come back to the holy mountain Yerushalayim, right? You know the song Uva'u Ovdim Me'eretz Ashur V'Anidachim Me'eretz Mitzrayim Uva'u Ovdim Be'eretz Ashur V'Anidachim Me'eretz Mitzrayim V'Yishtachavu L'Hashem Bahar HaKodesh. So that's the pasuk here, Yeshayahu Chav Zayin Yud Gimel. And so here, as I said, there's this dispute whether these psukim, these verses that talk about the future redemption and the ingathering of the exiles, are referring only to Yehuda and Binyamin, the southern kingdom, or no, they refer to the 10 lost tribes as well. And that's what Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi is saying here. Now, so you have here in the Mishnah and in the Gemara here, you have three different approaches. One opinion that says they will not return. That's Rabbi Akiva. They'll not return. One opinion that says that they will return so long as they do tshuva, that their actions are not like kayom hazeh, right? And then an opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, which says, no, a great shofar will be sounded and they will be gathered up, right? This famous verse that made its way into this famous song. They will be gathered up from Ashur and those who are lost and dispersed in Eretz Mitzrayim, in Egypt, and ultimately they're going to come and serve Hashem and bow down to Him, V'yishtachavu L'Hashem Bahar HaKodesh, His holy mountain in Jerusalem, the Har HaBayit, with the final redemption. And according to this opinion, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, it doesn't seem to require even them to do tshuva. He doesn't make it conditional. He doesn't say it's conditional that they do tshuva, and then the great shofar will be sounded, and then they'll be returned to their land. It doesn't say that. Right? It could be that it's not conditional. Okay? You can, or maybe it's both. If, right, as some explain, that redemption will come sooner if we merit it, if we do tshuva, right? Be'ita achishena. If we do tshuva, we'll speed it up. It'll happen now. If not, it will happen anyway. The time will run out. It will take its course. And we'll reach a point of no return. And then Hashem will have to redeem us. Okay? So those are three different approaches you see here in the Mishnah and the Gemara in Perek Chelek in Sanhedrin. But there's a fourth approach, which I think has tremendous relevance. At least I see tremendous relevance in it for the current situation today with Ethiopian Jewry, with the B'nai Menashe from Myanmar, Burma, and other groups who claim to be from the 10 lost tribes, who maintain a tradition that they come from the tribe of Dan or Menashe, or one of the other lost tribes. And this is going back to the Yerushalmi here in source number 8. This is a parallel passage in the Yerushalmi, in the 10th Perek, Halacha Hey, source number 8. Okay. This is a parallel passage to the passage that we just saw. Right? We already saw part of this passage, which tried to identify those places that they were exiled to. And Rabbi Chizkiah, where I've underlined, says, Rabbi Chizkiah, Rabbi Abahu, B'Shem Rabbi Elazar, Im ba'im hein gerei tzedek latid lavo, Antolinus ba berosh kulam. There's a whole discussion, who is this Antolinus, but put that aside for a moment. According to this opinion, it sounds like they are going to return as righteous converts. As we said, the Gemara in Yevamot questions whether they're even Jewish nowadays. According to Rabbi Yochanan, they're pasul. Why? We assume they've intermarried. The Gemara asks, what about the women, right? If a Jewish woman marries a Jewish man, but the child is a non-Jewish man, the child is still Jewish. And if the child is a woman and she marries a non-Jewish man, and so on and so forth, the Gemara says, well, there's this tradition that the women were barren, the women who were lost either were barren or they were made to be barren. They were, what would be the right word? I'm starting to forget my English. They were...
Sometimes like fetal circumcision.
Right, something to that effect. Or they performed, hysterectomies. I don't know, some sort of... No, but some explain that they were actually forcibly... castrated would be by a male. What's the equivalent? Sterilized. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you. Sterilized. So the Gemara says either they didn't have children. It could be that they were barren, or maybe they were sterilized. Different ways to interpret that. But in any case, without going into that, there's this fourth opinion here that they will return as righteous converts, and I think that's tremendously significant for our day and age when we've seen all of these groups claim connection to the Jewish people, maintain traditions that they come from one of the lost tribes. And then, yes, their status as Jews is indeed in question. And even sometimes people might argue it's not nice. How do you make them undergo conversion here? They've maintained a tradition all of these years. How do you make them undergo a conversion to rule out any questions, any sfeikot, any doubt? It's not nice. These people for thousands of years have maintained a tradition. So first of all, if there is sufficient evidence, they do not have to undergo conversion. And in fact, on Shavuot, in my shul, in Har Nof, this Rav Rosenthal, who davens in our shul during the week and served as a dayan in Yerushalayim for many years, was involved in the status of the Jews of Cochin. And he gave a fascinating discussion in my shul on Shavuot about how they dealt with this question. Without going into all the details, one of the things that they found is they had all of these shtari shichrur, all of these gittin, these documents, which were meant to free slaves. Right? If you have an Eved Kanani, you have to free them with a shtar shichrur or a shifcha Kananit, with a get shichrur. So that was one piece of evidence. Very interesting. But there were other reasons as well. But he felt that they did not require a conversion, that their status as Jews was accepted without the requirement of undergoing a conversion. But here, as you see, interesting, according to Rav Chizkiah, in the name of Rabbi Abau, in the name of Rabbi Elazar, there's this opinion that they will return as Gerei Tzedek, as righteous converts. Right? So we saw 4 different opinions. The opinion of Rabbi Akiva, that they will never return to the Jewish people. Another opinion that it's conditional if they do tshuva, that's Rabbi Shimon. Im ma'asehem kiyom hazeh einan chozrin. If they continue in their ways like today, they will not return. However, im lav, if they change their ways, yes, chozrin, they will indeed return. According to Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, they will return seemingly without condition. He makes it unconditional. A great shofar will be sounded on that day. Uva ovdim be'eretz Ashur, v'anidachim me'eretz Mitzrayim, v'ishtachavu l'Hashem bar HaKodesh. The dispersed from Assyria, from the land of Egypt, they will come back home and bow down before God on His holy mountain, the Har HaBayit in Yerushalayim. And then finally, the opinion in the Yerushalmi that we just saw, that maybe they'll return as righteous converts. Okay? We'll just end with a famous nevuah from Yeshayahu, Perek Yud Aleph, here in source number 16, at the bottom of your source sheets, where Yeshayahu, it's such a beautiful nevuah. There is the famous nevuah of how the lion will lie down with the lamb, there'll be peace. Yeshayahu is talking about the future, the messianic times. Now again, you can read this passage to refer to maybe only Yudan Binyamin, to the exclusion of the 10 tribes, the 10 lost tribes, or no, as Rabbi Yehuda Nasi understood the pasuk there in Yeshayahu Perek Chav Zayin, this too maybe refers to the 10 lost tribes as well, how in the future all of the Jewish people, including the 10 lost tribes, will return. Vaya bayom ahu Yosif Adonai shenit yado liknot et sharamo asher yishaer me'ashur u'mitzrayim u'mipatros u'mikush. Kush is often identified as Ethiopia. I have a close relationship with the community in Ethiopia, and I've been there a number of times to volunteer and teach in Addis and Gondar in the north. U'me'elam, mishinar, u'me'chamat, u'me'iyei hayam. Even the far-flung islands, right? You sometimes have these tribes on different islands and places who claim a connection with the Jewish people. Who knows? This is the promise of the ingathering, the exiles from the 4 corners of the earth. And we have seen this in our own day, whether it's the Jews from Ethiopia, whether it's the Jews, the Bnei Menashe from Myanmar, Burma, or other groups. We are witnessing nothing short of a miracle in our day, the fulfillment of the words of the prophets. Have a wonderful day. We will see you all, Mitzvah Hashem, next Wednesday morning. Take care.